Hi, and welcome to the Jamstack Incubation Engineering Update. Spent the last week almost entirely updating existing MRs. One of them is the source editor extension for YAML files that may potentially have a bigger impact beyond pages, so it's really important to get it right, but it takes a little longer than expected. That MR in turn is a precondition for the pages onboarding wizard that I've talked a lot about in the previous updates. Once the source editor extension is merged, I would like to start the review on that one. So I've put in more work on it to get it from this prototype kind of state to something that can actually be merged. As part of that, I added another MR that adds a property to pages metadata table, indicating whether the onboarding is complete. The reason is because the onboarding wizard could be done and complete, but the pipeline that deploys the pages may not be finished or may not be successful. And as long as that pipeline isn't successful, the pages deployed property is false. Currently, this pages deployed property is what I use to identify whether or not to display this onboarding wizard. The new property, however, would be set true once all the steps on the wizard are completed, but before pages is actually deployed. That means we can now show this helpful splash screen in case, onboarding is complete, but the pages pipeline isn't yet finished. So this would be all for the what I did update this week, but I think we have a few minutes to spare. So let me just dive a little deeper into something that didn't make the cut in an earlier update, because last month in October was the Jamstack Conf, and as part of that, Netlify published the very interesting Jamstack community survey. Even with the caveat that the survey respondents are for the most part Netlify users, I found this such a valuable resource. I took the time to summarize the most important findings as they relate to what I do here at GitLab. Check it out. Number one is the purpose of Jamstack sites, like what kind of applications run on the Jamstack. The biggest applications, obviously, or the most common applications are personal blogs or portfolio. But on number two is already B2B software, e-commerce, consumer software, and informational pages. GitLab Pages is currently very focused on documentation and software. So I guess we have a huge market untapped as of yet. The same thing, very interesting, the traffic of Jamstack sites, like how many users do Jamstack sites have? And again, we're looking at thousands of users. I think for smaller websites, the performance improvements that Jamstack offers aren't as important. And for millions of users, you probably are looking at legacy applications. What kind of industries are Jamstack sites located in? And again, we see a lot of non-technical industries like advertising, marketing, education, finance, media, business support and logistics, healthcare, entertainment. So there's a huge tail of applications that aren't targeted currently by what we do with GitLab Pages. I'd say we're mostly focused on more technical clients with what GitLab Pages does. I think the most interesting bit of the whole Jamstack community survey is what technologies are Jamstack developers using. And what should we experiment with and look at supporting, especially in terms of software languages. I mean, JavaScript is the top used language, obviously, because it's front end mostly. But very, very popular is also TypeScript. The adoption is already huge at almost 60% of users or respondents. But if you look at the satisfaction score, people are extremely happy with TypeScript, which is very interesting. So if we have this relation between satisfaction score and usage, we can identify up and coming languages and technologies. So with a low adoption but high satisfaction score, that is something that we should be looking at because it might develop into a very interesting set of languages in the future. So in this area, we have Go, Swift, Rust, and Elixir, which is very notable. So if we look at the popular frameworks, that is a very interesting chart. We can see that React has an adoption at about 70% of all developers that responded to the survey. So that is huge, and it's still at a very high satisfaction score. In this area, we have a wide adoption and still a very high satisfaction score. So one of them is Next.js, which is basically building on React. It's a server-side rendering engine for React. And here, number 5 is Vue.js. In the up-and-coming area, with a low adoption but high satisfaction score, the highest satisfaction score really has Vite, which is a build engine that is intending to replace things like Webpack. So it has always been held for it being extremely fast. And then in here we have frameworks like Nuxt.js, Eleventy, and Svelte. Nuxt.js is basically the same that Next.js is for React, Nuxt is for Vue. Eleventy is a static site generator. Also very interesting, and people are very happy with it. I think it makes sense to have a look at the down and out as well, like what frameworks aren't particularly used, and they have a low satisfaction score, so people aren't happy with them either. Inside here we have Hugo, Jekyll, and Angular, which are frameworks that GitLab Pages documentation has regularly focused on, so we might want to rethink and add more of the popular frameworks, especially from the up-and-coming area, to there. So with a low satisfaction score, but still a huge adoption in this area, we have jQuery, Express.js, and Gatsby. And I interpret this as, okay, people don't like it, but they can't quite get away from it. And there's also a chart for minor frameworks, which is basically just zooming into this little area where we have a rather low adoption, but we can identify up-and-coming frameworks if they have a very high satisfaction score. And in here, I think very notable is the rise of SwelteKit, which is basically a rendering engine for Svelte apps. In terms of backend technologies, which is not that much a focus for many Jamstack developers since they're mostly front-end engineers, but in here we have a very interesting view as what complements Jamstack front-ends on the backend. And we see that containers are play a huge role in this, and microservices obviously, but also functions as a service takes on a huge role, and people are very happy with using these kinds of things. So considering that GitLab has recently dropped serverless functions, I think this chart especially makes me want to reconsider whether we want to support something like that again. What is the primary concern why people use the Jamstack, or how they develop Jamstack applications? And not surprisingly, the number one concern is performance. And I guess this is something that GitLab Pages has a little bit of catching up to do, because performance is especially bad outside the United States. The same goes for uptime. so people want a reliable service for Jamstack applications. And security has increased since the last community survey. So previously dev speed was on third place, and now security is increasing in importance. Then the Jamstack community survey quickly went into the demographic of the respondents, which is also something I found rather interesting. So there's a development as compared to last year's survey. We have a huge increase in younger developers. The years of experiences are decreasing, and most developers have an experience of 1 to 4 years. So we should consider Jamstack engineers to be not particularly experienced. They interestingly relate that to their geographic region. The less experienced developers are more geographically diverse, so we get more developers from non-EU and US areas. So what are the takeaways that I see in these stats? One, we should look at performance. With GitLab pages currently being used by mostly technical industries, we're leaving a huge market of non-technical industries untapped. So there's a huge opportunity. And we should, as I said earlier, we should revisit serverless functions or edge computing in that regard. And we should think about Jamstack sites as sites that serve between hundreds and thousands of users, mostly. And if we want to catch up on the enterprise market, we should also consider serving sites that have millions of users. In terms of documentation, we've previously focused a lot on frameworks like Hugo or Jekyll or Gatsby. And they are becoming increasingly unpopular, so we should revisit that kind of thing. And if we focus on younger and less experienced users, we can strengthen our positions in non-US and EU markets. If you want to read through the findings yourself, I've created an issue in the Jamstack Meta project, and I've posted the link in the notes below. I'm actually very interested in our own customers' experiences and approaches, so feel free to comment on the issue if you have something to share. I like anecdotes. That will be something very useful to me. As I said, this was it for this week's update. Tune in next week for more. My plan is to go a little deeper on Fastly deployments and also having a little play with Netlify CMS at this stage. And I hope I'll see you then. Bye.